Welcome back to Point Blank, and we're speaking about the state of English in Singapore. And to tell us a little bit more about his opinion on it is Dr. K Seet, Senior Lecturer of English Language and Literature at NUS. He is also the face of Why You Cool is completely bilingual, and started our interview off camera by insisting first that he only gave Rizlo one lesson, and any improvement or lack thereof was not an indication of his teaching prowess.
So, Dr. Seet, what do you think of the state of spoken English in Singapore now?
It's been deteriorating in the 20 years that I've been teaching. I mean, I think that in the earlier years, the students spoke better. I attribute it to the fact that it's an MTV generation. People have shorter attention spans. They don't read enough. Because you pick up a lot of the idiom from books. Well, apart from MTV, I think the other reason has to be the bilingual policy. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that, but it certainly has had an impact. Because if you go to the canteen these days, you find that the students have this kind of like, you know, mixture of Chinese and English. They would say, would you like some soya bean juice, and then haw, and then, you know, and then they'll interject it with some Mandarin expression. So it's neither good spoken Mandarin or good spoken English. So I think the bilingual policy has somehow resulted in a younger generation of people who have the facility in neither.
So what does he think of Singlish?
I think Singlish is just the way Singaporeans are. I mean, there's part of it that's very charming, where you go overseas and you hear someone speaking at the synth, and you know that this person is Singaporean by way of, you know, the certain speech inflections and the way he might use the word can, for instance. But the clever ones are able to switch register. So I think that you can still retain that kind of vernacular charm of Singlish if you can switch register. So, you know, we talk about, like, you know, there's the basolectal, which is the lowest form, and then you've got the acrolectal, which is how standard English should be spoken and written. So if you were to speak to, say, a taxi driver, you don't want to use the acrolectal form, because it's almost as if you're being condescending and patronizing. But on the other hand, if you're speaking to, say, you know, your professor, then you kind of code switch accordingly. And I think the students who have the ability to do that can be empowered to speak Singlish, because Singlish is, in a sense, a measure of our own identity. So I don't want to lose that completely.
And Dr. Seet's pet peeves?
Singaporeans are full of mispronunciations because they often put the stress on the wrong syllable.
For example?
Well, one very predominant one is the word colleague, where the stress is on the first syllable, colleague. But a lot of Singaporeans will say colleague, so that's one. There's another one, which is, well, there are two that our people in power, some ministers, are even guilty of. One is the word opportunity. How often have you heard them say opportunity? So they put the stress on the second syllable when it should be opportunity. Then there's also mechanisms. You know, there are various mechanisms at work. But what would they say? They would say mechanism. And then, of course, this switching of the stress from the first syllable to the second syllable, you see it also in the trains. For instance, lavender, you know, the lavender flowers, but they call it lavender in the same way that they would say calendar instead of calendar. But my favorite one is the one that I often hear in SIA. When the trolley dollies come down with their tray of duty-free, ladies and gentlemen, would you like to purchase? And then I just want to, you know, I'm dying to tell them that it's purchase. Would you like to purchase, you know, a bottle of perfume or a carton of cigarettes? But they say purchase, purchase, purchase. It's nothing to do with perchance or chasing. You know, it's purchase.
With evidently high standards of what he thinks spoken English, who does Dr. K Seet regard as someone who speaks good English in Singapore?
I think my role model for spoken English is Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, because he pronounces every word as it should be pronounced, and it's almost like received pronunciation but virtually accentless. It's just the highest form of acrolectal speech, and it says it with such great gravitas. Well, of course, he's a man of great gravitas, but it's that, you know, there's no need to put on accent. We know that he went to Cambridge and all of that, and was educated in the UK. But he just uses a very pure acrolectal form of spoken English, pronouncing each word as it's meant to be pronounced, but without injecting an accent. So I really regard him as, like, you know, the role model for me.
Meanwhile, stay tuned because foreigners actually have their say on what they think of Singaporean spoken English.